The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcasts. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Gary. So, Gary, if you could tell me when and where you were born, and if you could describe to me what it was like, where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received. So, Gary, you're in the room.
Very good, sir. Okay, so I was born in 57 in Los Angeles. I grew up in a small suburb town called Culver City, which is nestled in between Los Angeles and the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. It's just a couple miles from the water. It's a studio town. A lot of studios were there. MGM, Sony Pictures is headquartered there now. It's on the old MGM lot. So a lot of people worked in the studios. I went to Culver City public schools, government schools, and Betsy Ross Elementary School, Culver City Junior High, Culver City High School, which were next door to each other. My dad got out of did 20 years in the Coast Guard, enlisted in 1942, was all around the Pacific. And then retired in 1964 as a senior chief petty officer in E8, and went to work for the Harbor Patrol in Marina del Rey as a law enforcement officer. He went to the LA County Sheriff's Academy for his police training and did that. My mom was a homemaker. My mom worked at the studios when she was growing up. So I definitely had a little more than your normal exposure to the movie industry from the standpoint of hearing her stories about, actually she worked for a while with Alfred Hitchcock. And she said taking dictation from Alfred Hitchcock was pretty difficult.
I guess you were scared most of the time.
She said he was kind of hard to understand sometimes, And then I have a sister, and we grew up in Culver City. We had a very, very wonderful life, the last year of our high school,
you raised your head now.
Oh, freeze.
Let's just wind it back a little bit. Let's have a look at the neighbourhood that you lived in. So you weren't far from some of the big studios.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
So were you like sort of around that sort of? Well, you see the sort of Beverly Hills, the big sort of
no, not at all. Actually,
big houses where all the stars live.
No, they don't live. They don't really live in Culver City. All of the below the line people is what they call them. The people, the artists, the set builders, the people that do all of the stuff that make the pictures what they are, lived in Culver City back then. And Culver City was known for its really good public schools. And the street, I grew up on Washington Boulevard in a house that was about 130 years old, which is ancient by LA standards. That's like, in the UK, that's just breaking it in. But in Los Angeles, that's like, my God, no, that would be like 4 blue plaques on the front, but here, anyway, so then I had really developed a love for history based on stories that I heard from my paternal grandmother and grandfather, who were born in the 1880s in Missouri. And so they were farm people. So I heard all the stories about that. And she gave me a handwritten genealogy that went back to the 1700s. And so that was amazing. And I really kind of developed a love of history from that, because have
you been able to get onto Ancestry and look up some of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Ancestry is an amazing tool.
Oh yeah, and I've done the 23andMe and Ancestry DNA. And it turns out I always thought I was English because I have an English last name, an old English last name. But in
Yeah.
actual fact, I'm more Scots and Irish than I am English, which really surprised me. And yeah, so yeah, a lot of Scots and Irish ancestors. And the first ancestor that came over from Britain was in the 1630s. And he said he was actually a Neville, which is a famous family name in Britain, the Dukes of Warwick and all of that.
Almost come over with Columbus then.
He actually came over as part of the Calvert, the Lord Calvert group, who were settling Maryland in a ship called the Ark and the Dove in 1630 something. So that's kind of exciting. And then I have another one that settled in it's Hastings actually, and he settled in Watertown, which is just down the road from Plymouth and Salem, Massachusetts, in the 1630s also. So you know, I have deep roots in this country. So that's sort of I love history.
Was he one of the ones that was chasing after the poor old witches?
You know, I wouldn't be surprised because, those people did not have a great sense of humor back then. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he was one of those, because he was a deacon in the local Puritan church, which means he probably was one of the least humorous of the Puritans there if he was a deacon. You know what I mean? No sense of humor.
Right in the middle of burning witches.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, maybe. Well, actually, they didn't burn any. They hung them. They didn't burn any in the United States. Yeah, they saved that for
pointless burning a witch.
Yeah, exactly. Smithfield over there in London is where they burned all the witches over there, right? Yeah. Well, at least a lot of them. Anyway, so anyway, so
we've gone off track a bit.
We did. We went down the genealogical rabbit hole. But anyway, so then.
So what about your elementary school?
How Betsy Ross Elementary School. Pretty unremarkable. Great teachers, and the schools that I went to were really good. They were very, very good. And the teachers themselves were very memorable. I can remember a lot of the teachers inspiring me with history and science and things like that they probably don't get now.
So I guess a lot of your schoolmates then would have had parents that are working in the industry, in some of the of the studios.
Yes. So, and the neighborhoods in Culver City, with a couple of exceptions, were pretty much middle class. Maybe there was one neighborhood that was in the hills above town that was sort of the upper middle class area. But there's no. I was a police officer in Beverly Hills, and that's where the real money was, and that's where the real movie stars and directors and producers lived, and so that was the serious stuff. Culver City was not. That was sort of the working class area. Like I said, the people who supported the industry, studios. Who actually made it work. And it was a great place to grow up. And we lived on tree-lined street that was idyllic in a fairly simple home, but built in the 40s after the war, kind of thing. But it was a great life.
So let's move on to some of your middle school. What was that like?
Well, that was the Culver City Junior High, and it was interesting. It was different than the elementary school because, for one thing, several of the teachers had paddles, which I'd never seen before. One teacher, I'll never forget, showed us his paddle on the first day, and it was an exquisite piece of walnut, polished piece of walnut that had holes drilled through it for additional velocity. But I don't really, so it increased its terminal performance, but I don't really believe that I ever saw anybody smacked with one. But it was certainly kind of one of those moments was like, oh crap, this is real. This is
Yeah.
serious. I also
Obviously setting
remember,
out his store
yeah,
before he
exactly.
needed to use it.
And
So
I also,
it's
exactly.
instilled that little bit of fear.
Exactly, and it was
Great.
in a very prominent place, and I remember back then, in the junior high, uh, a lot of fights, kids fighting all the time, girls fighting, guys fighting. I guess it was sort of like, all these little monsters running around with all these hormones raging through their bodies and not knowing what to do, and so they'd, pummel the crap out of each other, or at least try to. I had a few of those fights myself, but
Sounds like the school area I went to.
yeah, I mean, basically, yeah, it wasn't like it wasn't like really like rough and tumble, but there definitely was a lot of fighting. But interestingly, I remember when I went to high school, when we graduated and went to high school, that the atmosphere was much different. It seemed
Mm.
like fighting was pretty rare, very rare, as a matter of fact. And I think it was because of the changes in the little monsters,
Yeah,
biologically, the hormones, a little more maturity. And So, yeah, so that was in high school was,
yeah.
nothing, it was good, but it wasn't like super
So
fantastic. It was
so
okay.
so what was your main focus at school? What subjects did you really enjoy doing?
History. I've always loved history.
Yeah.
English, I enjoyed creative writing and writing classes, history classes. Um, I also enjoyed what we called here in this country industrial arts, which would be like practical classes like woodworking, metalworking, things like that. I learned some skills that have served me well later in life. My dad was an engineman. He was a specialist in propulsion, and so he could build anything, put anything back together, fix anything. So I grew up learning a little bit about it, but then in automotive shop, I learned even more. Took an engine apart, put it back together, all the carburetors, all those things that, of course, you can't possibly do now because it's all electronic. But
Yeah.
back then, it was possible. I
Yeah.
learned how to weld. I learned how to a little bit of woodworking. All these things have helped me throughout my life, and so I'm glad that they do that, and I wish they still did because I think it would be very. Those are practical skills that come in so handy. I know my son has called me from London, asking me, how do you patch a wall, or how do you do this, or do that. I'm like, son, you know, first off,
Go on YouTube.
yeah, exactly. Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much, yeah. It's not much you can't learn how to build if you don't find it on YouTube. It's like pretty
Yeah.
amazing. So, yeah.
So going through high school then, and did you graduate with honours at the end of it?
No, no, just a very average student, uninspired. Um, was towards the end of my high school career, I decided that I wanted to kind of follow in my father's footsteps and move into a career in law enforcement. So while I was in high school, I also became what we call over here a police explorer, which is sort of like a
Or like a cadet? Like
basically,
yeah,
uh,
we have like army cadets, sea
yeah,
cadets.
yeah,
So I guess you
exactly,
was like uh,
exactly, and you get a little taste for it. I went to the sheriff's academy for 16 weekends. Marched around, got screamed and yelled at, all that stuff, and so I kind of got a taste for it. You had, learn how to get your uniform correct and polish, spit shine your shoes, and all those things
yeah.
that you learn. And that was with the Culver City Police Department, and so that's really where I really got my first exposure to real rough and tumble police work was at Culver City, riding with the officers on ride-alongs and working within the police department, and then eventually becoming a paid member of the police department as a what
Mm.
they call a community service officer. But yeah, so that was going on while I was finishing up my last year of high school. So I had two parallel things going on at the same time, and I graduated and went to junior college for 2 years. Now, I had a conversation with my dad Actually, let me back up. You probably want to. I'm probably going ahead too fast here because I was going to tell you a funny story about what my dad told me that you probably would find amusing. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, let's just wind it back a little bit. So you're going through all of that
Right.
in high school,
Right.
and so what were the other classes that you were doing? Did you do any of the sort of the arts, or was it just the practical side of stuff?
Well, science. I loved biology because there was also a part of me that wanted to be a physician. But I was really bad in math, and so, or at least I didn't put the effort in I should have put into it. So that door kind of, at least I thought it closed. It probably, if I had been more disciplined, I probably could have sorted all of that out and gotten through. But my I enjoyed biology and the science classes that I had in high school. I enjoyed the writing classes and the history classes. I loved the history classes that I had. Um, but I think that for the most part, it was. I didn't really get involved in like drawing or anything like that. I did take speech classes, but I didn't take like dramatic arts or any of those things. I didn't really, I wasn't really drawn to acting or any of that.
You wasn't much of a thespian then.
No, I wasn't. Not till later in life. As a detective, you have to be a bit of an actor. So
bit of role play going on.
Basically, yes.
Well, what about musical instruments? Did you get into music at all?
No.
Or wasn't that your bag either?
I have no musical skills whatsoever. But
join the club.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't even carry a tune in a bucket.
How many pints does it take? I find that my singing improves with my directly related to my alcohol consumption level. At least I think it does.
I think we all have that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So you said that there's something that your dad told you once.
Well, yes, because when I was in my first year of junior college, my dad, I had met this guy who was a reserve police officer. He and I went to some of the same classes at the college. And he had been an Army MP, and he was thinking about going back into the Army as a military police officer again. And he was encouraging me to enlist. And so I sat down with my dad, the chief, and I said, "Dad, I think I want to enlist in the Army." And he gave me the, "Son, if you're going to go in the Army," he says, "Son, the peacetime military sucks." And he said, "If you want to go in, you should finish your college and go in as an officer." And I said, "Okay, all right, very good." And I listened to him, and I shelved that idea, and basically got locked into a career in law enforcement. I never even really looked back. I wish I had, actually. I think a little bit of military service is a great thing for everybody. I think it. Not everybody. Obviously, there's some people that just it's totally unsuitable for. But I think a lot of young people need that. Need that direction.
It gives you those key values and standards to live by,
and the importance of teamwork and something bigger than yourself, and discipline. And
because you're about the same age as me, and say I went through the Cold War in my early years. Spent a lot of time in Germany, which was great. Germany and obviously Northern Ireland. so we've got some real hands-on live training in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And then because we had a big standing army in Germany,
right, the BOR, right?
Great for sports and all the rest of it, but nowadays they've taken all the fun out of being in the military.
That's, and in the United States, you probably you may even have the same problem in the services there, but in the United States, there's a huge recruiting issue. There's also a
Yeah.
huge recruiting problem with the police forces in the United States too. People are not
Yeah.
interested in that job anymore, even though they're paying, in some
Right.
instances, a lot of money, astounding amounts of money. I think about what I was paid when I started out and what a brand new police officer is making now. My jaw drops. I'm astounded.
Yeah.
But
I mean, why would you want to do a job where people abuse you every day?
yeah, I mean, I was talking. Well, exactly, and I was talking to somebody yesterday about it, and I said my advice is to don't, if you want a career in law enforcement, go in a non-uniform thing like the FBI or Secret Service or Department of Homeland Security as a special agent, as an investigator, because when you put a uniform on, you put a target on yourself, and it's not necessarily, you know, the physical danger, which of course is there, and I believe is even worse now than it was when I was
Mm.
a police officer, but it's the legal peril that you are in constantly. Sometimes you don't even know you're there. You're in that peril. I mean, you could be the most moral, decent, upstanding law enforcement officer that ever walked the beat, so to speak,
Yeah.
and still get caught up in a maelstrom of crap because you were assigned to go to a scene and something happens and now you get drug into federal court because of it. And that is what scares people away.
Yeah.
Most law enforcement officers go in for the right reasons, but
Mm.
those kinds of things is what scares them off and why they retire now early. Um,
Yeah.
and that of course creates a brain drain, which is also bad. I don't know if the Met is having recruiting issues, but
Yeah.
you
As
know,
is, I think, every other force in the country,
yeah.
including the armed forces. They're
Okay,
all
well,
struggling at recruiting at the moment. Um,
that's
and
that's
and I
bad.
think some of the problems, particularly for the likes of the army, because we're not actually fighting a war, um, recruiting is down. Retention's
Hmm.
the biggest problem, I think. Once you've been on operations, coming back and doing normal exercises
Right.
doesn't float people's boats,
Yeah,
and
that's
that's
like what
why
my
a
dad
lot of
said.
people
Yeah.
leave because they're just bored with going on exercises where before they've been on active operations, where it's life or death all the time, and
Right.
they don't get that. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that the recruiting's down, is because we're not fighting a war.
Right. Right.
If we was to go to war with Russia, I think you'd see recruitment shoot up fairly
God help
significantly.
us if that happens. Good Lord.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh man.
it won't end it won't end pretty, that's for sure.
No, it will not end
But I think
pretty. The
that's part of
Russians.
that problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
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 I
and
think,
yeah.
like you say, the Met and every other police force are having the same issues
Hmm.
with recruiting, and particularly retention. I think retention's the big one.
Right.
Um, Trying to keep people once you've trained them.
It's yeah, and you know, it's interesting. I first started. I've been, you know, traveling to England for 35 years, so I've watched the evolution of policing in Britain over that last 35, 40 years,
Mm.
and it's dramatic. Back in the day, back when I first started going over there, it was Bobbies walking a beat, and you didn't see their truncheons or their cuffs or anything, and
Yeah,
then you saw then you saw them wearing the anti-stab vests, and you started seeing them wear belts, but they still were wearing the hats and all that, and which they still do
yeah,
to a degree, and then you started seeing, you know, and then the people that were protecting like you know, different palaces and things like that, they were carrying old Smith and Wesson 38 revolvers, and of course
yeah,
now they're all kitted out ready for battle with all kinds of
yeah,
fun
absolutely.
stuff, the best
Yeah,
that they can get, which I'm very glad for because they need it. But
yeah.
that was never you never saw that back in the day, as you well know. You live
No,
there, you know. I'm just
I did.
getting little
I,
little bits
I
and
can
pieces.
remember getting cuffed round the ear by a copper.
Well, there you go.
on more than one occasion.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with bet there was
And getting
alcohol
dragged home
involved.
by the ear. Is this yours?
Yeah, and you know
What's he
what?
done this time?
And you know what? Back in those days, policing there and here was more physical, but there was
Yeah,
probably a lot less of it, and it was far less serious
yeah.
because there
And they had the
was
respect.
exactly, they had a respect and a certain amount of fear, and I think a certain amount of fear is actually a good thing, because the people who are just never going to play ball, they need to be a little afraid of the consequences of misbehavior,
Yeah.
and um, that's all gone now. And now you see that people are not afraid of the police anymore, and they ambush them here in this country, and
Mm.
taunt them and burn police cars and do all these things that if you did that back when I was growing up, it wouldn't
Oh,
end well for you, not at all.
no. So now,
So
now, now, now it's gone the other way. I mean, there is no real respect on
right,
certain elements of
right,
society that just don't care.
yeah, exactly,
And
exactly,
there's no real deterrent through the courts.
right, exactly. Well, that's the
They
other
know that they're
problem
going
too.
to only do half a sentence if that.
Exactly.
And the courts are so lenient with them nowadays. It's just beggars belief.
Yeah.
But there you
Well,
go. Such is life.
exactly. It's cyclical.
So anyway, let's go back. What was your
Mhm.
first job when you left college?
I was a paid community service officer with the Culver City Police Department, and which was basically, I did a lot of stuff that freed up police officers to do other things, and assisted in with investigations from a standpoint of providing research support or whatever, what
Mm.
we call grunt work, basically.
Yeah.
Simple things, jailing duties, all that kind of stuff, dispatching, um, and then I got hired on with the Manhattan Beach Police Department as a police officer in 1979,
Mm.
and
That's the
began
other
my.
side of the country, isn't it? Manhattan.
Oh, no, Manhattan Beach is a suburb of Los Angeles, not
Ah,
Manhattan in New York, Manhattan Beach.
yeah.
It's a
Aha.
really cool little beach town, that back then had a very, very high, um, flight attendant quotient. Most of this, because it's right next to LAX, there were a lot of
Got you.
female flight attendants that lived in Manhattan Beach, and a lot of
Ah,
pubs,
gotcha.
and a lot of alcohol. Actually, the cocaine trade in the United States kind of got started in the Manhattan Beach area there, so there was a bit of cocaine, and uh, I always say to people that it had a high alcohol and bikini quotient, which is basically that best describes the Manhattan Beach that I started working in. So
Mm.
yeah, drunkest humans I've ever met in my life.
Oh, you
We're
haven't been
just.
to you haven't been around here then.
Well, no, I have, and I learned a very valuable lesson, about the let's get the Yank drunk thing on a trip up to York, and trying to stay up with the
Yeah.
good constables of the York police. It doesn't end well. It really did not end
No.
well. No, no, no. So
Yeah.
I don't even try.
It's,
I don't even
yeah.
try. I learned a long time ago. Don't try.
Yeah. Don't try and keep up with a British squaddy.
No, 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 no.
Lots of Yanks have fallen foul of that one.
Yeah. Like I said, hard won lesson. Learned that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So
So
moving on in your career then.
uh-huh.
So that's how you started out as a rookie copper.
All right.
So a little bit later in your career, I mean, you got some really interesting jobs.
Right.
So let's have a look at some of the interesting stuff you've done.
Okay. Okay. Well, one of the first things I should probably that was really sort of a I mean, it was a moment that really impacted my career was the murder of my father while I was in the 3rd week of the police academy. He was stabbed to death by a crazy man who had been sent to jail and then released after 18 months. So that profoundly affected my career in many, many ways, and probably kind of got me more interested in investigative work as opposed to uniform policing. And I always liked that stuff anyway. I always liked putting
Mm.
puzzles together and, figuring things out. So my career really gravitated towards the agencies that I work for, and the activities I did gravitated towards investigative work.
Yeah.
And that was a really, really watershed moment in my life, a
Yeah.
huge moment in my life.
I mean, that happens far, far too often.
Mm-hmm,
In fact, we got a case here
mm-hmm,
just the other week. A known convicted murderer
mm-hmm.
released from prison, and a few days later, he's gone and killed some poor woman.
Yeah. Well, that happens all the time. Yeah.
And it happens all the time, and it
Yeah.
and it shouldn't. I mean, just shouldn't
No.
happen.
No,
But,
it should not. I've known so many people in my career who have been assaulted, seriously assaulted or killed by individuals who should have still been in prison but were released.
yeah,
That is a fact. A very
mm,
small percentage of the population are the ones who commit the serious crimes, and they almost always have a long and distinguished record of offenses and convictions.
yeah,
And I used to tell people you really have to work really hard at it and do your homework to go to prison in California. And that was back then.
yeah,
It's now even far worse than that. So,
yeah.
yeah,
It's
so,
crazy,
yeah,
absolutely
it is,
crazy.
indeed. So, yeah, so I worked at Manhattan Beach for a couple of years, worked patrol, had some interesting things happen, but I moved to Beverly Hills and had even more interesting things happen there. And that's where I finally got my first assignment in detective squad. And I really love that. And that is actually where I actually met my very first terrorist, a real no shit bomb throwing terrorist. I didn't
Wow.
know it then. I was interviewing him, and he was a car thief, and I was interviewing him, and he had all these burns all over his one side of his body. And I asked him, and he was traveling on an Italian passport, but he wasn't really Italian. He admitted that he was from the Middle East, uh, and then he told me that he was injured in a gas station fire, and he had a very unique tattoo, which is unusual. Um, and So about a month or so later, we saw a bulletin about this guy and about a guy matching this description with that exact same tattoo. And I was like, and he was a bomb maker. Well, there you go. you know,
And you let him go.
and I let him. Well, it was an auto theft case. It wasn't it was one of
Yeah.
those things. He stole a car for some purpose. I don't know what, but
Well, bombing it.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. But that was the first time I ever met somebody who was actually
Mm.
involved in terrorism. So anyway, I worked in patrol for about 2 or 3 years, and I worked detectives for about 3 years, and then I transferred over to the LA County DA's office and was an investigator there. And I worked major narcotics and intelligence, and I worked fraud cases and things like that, welfare,
So, did you
public
do any
assistance
undercover
fraud.
work then?
Not really. Not at the DA's office. I didn't do any undercover work. I did a little tiny bit when I went to the Department of Justice, a couple of undercover buys. But for the most part, I worked. We were investigators, and we followed narcotics traffickers around, in plain clothes and all that stuff and
Yeah.
everything. But I didn't work undercover. with an assumed persona and all that stuff.
So you did a lot of surveillance work, a lot of sitting around.
A lot of
surveillance sitting around
work.
In a car, eating donuts, drinking coffee.
That's right.
Waiting for something to happen.
And that's where I discovered the joys of, back then it was called books on tape. And I listened to so many books while I was on surveillance. I mean, you can't believe the number of books I listened to. It was unbelievable. It was fantastic. So yeah, and then I transferred over to the California Department of Justice as a special agent, and worked major narcotics for 2 years, did a lot more surveillance, and then also did what's called diversion, which is actually the misuse, overprescribing, and trafficking of pharmaceuticals, as opposed to like cocaine, heroin, marijuana, the usual stuff, which is actually really interesting and fascinating, because the people you go after are MDs or dentists. And I did some really big cases involving those kinds of people, which are tough because they have the resources. They're not stupid. They have the resources to really defend themselves vigorously. And then I went over to the Bureau of Investigation and worked fraud cases and government corruption cases for a while, which was interesting. I did a couple of
Was that the FBI?
No, well, it was at that moment, the government corruption cases, I did work with the FBI, but the fraud cases, I didn't. But the government corruption cases, actually, I did work one fraud case with the FBI. That was an undercover operation. I was assisting them. I wasn't part of the undercover operation. And then I worked a joint government corruption case with the FBI involving corruption in a California Department of Labor. And we got 8 convictions in federal district court on that case. And we could have still been working it for quite a while. And then I went into intelligence and got a position at the Joint Terrorism Task Force with the FBI, because I already had the necessary vetting and clearances, because having worked with the FBI before, so it was an easy thing for me to go over there. And I worked what we call domestic terrorism cases, which are not international, but local knuckleheads, right wing, left wing knuckleheads, homegrown stuff, right?
I guess you get plenty of those.
Oh yeah. Oh, of course. And then nothing quite as interesting as the IRA, but lame nevertheless. And then I got promoted to special agent supervisor and started working internal affairs cases, and did that from January of 2001 till September of 2001, when I was asked to stand up, post 9/11, asked to stand up a counterterrorism task force for the Department of Justice in Los Angeles. And it was a multi-agency task force that we put together with a bunch of different entities. And we worked closely and were embedded with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, because I felt that the FBI, being the lead agency with counterterrorism investigations, we needed to be part of that. And so what we did was, our role was not to do criminal investigations. Our role was to assemble intelligence, put together intelligence packages on people that were crooks, and then hand them off to investigative agencies that would do the actual criminal investigation, kick the doors in, throw people in jail, all the fun stuff. And we developed intelligence that was on all kinds of different stuff, prison recruiting, which was very prevalent, all kinds of different things, fraud, immigration fraud, which is so common and a big deal, tax stamp fraud on cigarettes that were the funds from which were funding Hezbollah, all kinds of stuff. So and I love that, and I still do. I'm fascinated by that stuff. Always have been. So that's
that came about through 9/11 then.
Yes, exactly. And
would you if 9/11 hadn't happened, would you still been in infernal affairs? Is that what they call it? Infernal affairs.
Infernal affairs.
Nobody likes anybody from that department, do they?
No, I know. You want to talk about, I mean, that is always a crack up when you walked into a field office, because we had field office all over the state of California, and you walk into a field office with internal affairs. And if you walked in there as a special agent or a special agent supervisor from another office, they would be like, yeah, okay, whatever, find a desk over someplace, and, they don't, go out in the parking lot, bugger off, right? But when you walk in as internal affairs, they salute smartly. They get you your coffee, and they create a workspace for you. It's probably bugged, but they created a workspace for you, and they couldn't do enough. You know how that is, right?
Yeah, fall over backwards for you.
Exactly. Oh, can't do enough for you. It was always a crack up to notice that, because I'd visited those offices as just an agent before, and got like, we don't care who you are or what you are, and when you walk in as an internal affairs guy, it's like, oh, yes sir, 3 bags full, so it was pretty funny. But internal affairs is a fascinating job, and I believe it personally that anybody who is in a position of leadership in law enforcement needs to do a stint in internal affairs, because you learn pretty quickly from seeing the dumb stuff that people do where the wheels fall off the cart. And usually it's a failure. Whenever you have a problem with an employee, it's almost always a failure of training and supervision. And it is a problem where, a person is allowed to run amok and not really being properly supervised, and or the system fails and they don't monitor what he's doing and all that stuff, and a lot of that stuff, guys can get their careers can be saved if the supervisor does their job properly. And I mean, when I started running that task force, I took a lot of the lessons I learned from internal affairs and implemented them as a manager, and probably saved a few careers in the process. So yeah, so so I really believe that that's something that everybody in policing, in management, should do a stint in internal affairs. It's quite an eye opener, So
let's move on a bit then. So you got into the intelligence work, and how long was you in that for?
I continued with that kind of stuff after I retired in 2008. But intelligence from, I would say, 97, 98 until I left all of that completely. I was in some aspect of it, one way or another, involved with intelligence, research, analysis, collection, till 2012, when I just sort of got tired of not being home and, took a different career path or different path. And I'm also a huge believer in intelligence. The only real way to combat terrorism is through intelligence collection and analysis and information sharing. I firmly believe that. And I think, that is, I used to tell my guys, I used to tell them that if we see a smoke plume on the horizon, we have failed in our mission. If you see a building burning in downtown Los Angeles that was there 5 minutes ago and now it's a wreck, we have failed. And so that was one of the things that we took very seriously, was trying to ensure that we did everything we could to detect plots or
I think
individuals who could be involved in such things.
Yeah, I think the law enforcement side has to be lucky all of the time, where the terrorist only needs to be lucky one at a time.
Yeah, and I say that when I used to give talks, that was one of the first things I would say straight away.
Yeah,
Is the bad guys only need once. We have to be lucky every single time. And
yeah,
certainly, both the United Kingdom and the United States have had experienced some horrific terrorist attacks, but also had some very, very close near misses uh,
yeah,
that were interdicted because of excellent sources and intelligence collection and analysis.
yeah,
Certainly, the planes plot, to blow up planes in midair using the
yeah,
devices assembled on board the plane, was something that would have been, man, I can't even imagine if they'd even been successful in knocking down 4 planes. Can you imagine? I
yeah.
mean, the ripple effect that would have, we would probably still be feeling to this day.
Mm.
And but through excellent collection analysis, probably mainly through the security service in your country, that plot was averted. So
Yeah,
there you go.
I think our security services over here are probably second to none.
Yeah,
Um, they are the best in the world. I
yeah.
mean, I had a job where I used to go into Vauxhall Cross, which is the
Mhm.
headquarters of MI6.
Yes, I've seen
And
the buildings many times. It's an interesting building,
and
right on the river.
there were some very, very strange people working that building.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then across the river at Thames House, which is the home
Yep,
of MI5,
yep.
there's some
Which
strange
is
people working there too.
a far more sedate building. The
Mm,
Millbank building is far more
yeah,
sedate and unassuming. And unless
yeah,
you wouldn't necessarily guess that all that stuff is going on there. But if you look at the
no,
other building, it's like, hello, hi, we're here, you know, you know, and the agency here in this country, the CIA, and I mean, there are signs, but it is surrounded by forest. It's
yeah,
not like you got to want to be there and get there. You know what I mean? It's not easy. It's not
yeah,
like, taking a boat and, going up the Thames and capping off a rocket at the building like you could
yeah,
at MI6.
yeah.
It's a completely different thing, you know, but hey, what are you going to do? Right.
So let's have a look at what happened post 2012 then.
Okay.
What did you
Well,
move on
post
to?
2012, while I was in Iraq, actually 2012 has two stories. Uh, Basically, while I was in Iraq with the Army as an embedded subject matter expert, I was with 10th Mountain Division as a civilian advisor with improvised explosive device defeat cell at Camp Victory, which was the inspiration for my book Outside the Wire. I'd never been in the
Camp
service.
Victory. I can tell you a bit about Camp Victory.
Right.
I
Oh, yeah,
was
I bet
I
you
was
can.
I was based down at Basra Airport.
Okay.
I was in,
Basra, yeah.
and we're in psychological operations.
Sure.
And myself and my boss flew up to Baghdad for a conference at the Green Zone, but we flew
Uh-huh.
into Camp Victory.
Yep.
And the guys that was putting us up put us up in this hooch. They call it a
Right. Yeah.
hooch. So it's
Yes.
like
Yes. That's what we called them. Yep.
and on top of this hooch, they had one of these big pop fires,
Hmm.
that's synonymous to that area. So we've been going down into Baghdad. That when we arrived, we took us down in two of these pickup trucks. But as we got to the gate to go out, two Humvees and another pickup truck pulled in front of us and went out in front of us. Halfway into the green zone in Baghdad, there was a big explosion in front of us, and they blew up the vehicles just in front of us. There was at least 2 dead there and some
Oh
serious
my God.
injuries. We got there. Helicopter came in, ushered us on. We carried on to the green zone, which was scary because they held us outside with all the locals and everything before they'd let us in.
Yeah.
We came back to Camp Victory after the meeting without incident.
Yeah.
That evening we were on top of this hooch with his pot fire, having a few near beers, which is
Yeah.
the
Ugh.
alcohol-free stuff.
Yeah.
Disgusting stuff.
Rubbish. Yeah. Not
Um,
good. Not good. I
and there
have
was
a
a
theory about that.
yeah, and there was a burst of 5.0, about sort
Yeah.
of 30, 40 rounds came over our heads, really, really close. But it hit the guy just down on one of the watchtowers, killed a guy in the tower.
Oh,
So I
yeah. I
thought
know.
this is a
Yeah.
decisively unfriendly place to be.
Yeah.
And then the following day, we just managed to take off before they closed the airport because of a sandstorm, and the whole place
Mhm.
was orange. Never seen anything like it. But
Yeah.
yeah, my time in Baghdad wasn't what I enjoyed.
Yeah.
In fact, I
Well,
didn't like Iraq at all, really.
well, yeah. We were actually supposed to move down to Basra when in 2008 that they were uh, there was going to be a change, and the UK forces were going to move out of Basra, and
Yeah,
American forces, I think it was going to be a National Guard element, were going to move in. And I was told that when we moved down there, that because Basra used to get mortared all the time, that you had to sleep in a like
hardened compound.
like a concrete or some kind of like shelter
Yeah,
inside your hooch to protect you from frag, from this. I'm going, oh my God, this place sucks enough as it is, let alone having to sleep in a friggin' coffin, you know. But I
yeah,
heard about that. I heard that Basra was pretty
yeah.
tough
It wasn't
place.
wasn't a fun place.
No, no.
Alamara was probably even worse.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
but there you go.
I,
That's Iraq for you.
well, there you go. I mean, uh, I used to tell the guys that I worked with that my vote was next time we decide to have another war, we need to do it back in Europe where they have wine, attractive women, in pretty places, as opposed to this god awful hellhole, in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't have anything like that happen, thank God. I did
Mm.
uh, accidentally at night drive off the base and ended up on the the Baghdad Airport Road by accident, and in a unarmored Ford Ranger pickup truck with just my little Beretta M9 pistol, and no body armor, no helmet, no nothing. Really, really tight. That was like a moment where I went, "Oh crap! I am really. How do I get back? Where do I get
Yeah.
back?" And it was close for a while. Man, that little pickup truck just had no. I had to go across some sand to get to the other side of the freeway and to get back.
Mm.
And it started to bog down in the sand, and I was like, "Oh Lord, please, please help me!" But yeah, and it was crazy.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating experience. But one of the things that inspired the book was the fact that initially, while I was there were so many suicides, which I personally believe has a lot to do with the fact that there are no outlets for soldiers, unlike in wars past and times past. There's no alcohol, there's no
Mm.
nothing. And so all these guys do is stand around and talk and smoke
Yeah.
cigarettes. That's all they have to do is stand around and talk and smoke cigarettes, and that ain't going to get it. And so
No.
that's why I think that whole idea of not allowing alcohol, is insane.
Yeah.
You guys didn't have that at your base, right?
I think we had the 2 can rule, as far
Yeah.
as I can
Well, at least
remember.
you had something, right? You had
Yeah.
something, you know. And
But
but anyway,
actually, when we were in Afghanistan, it was dry.
oh, okay.
Definitely,
Oh,
definitely
that's
frowned upon in Afghanistan. But you
right,
had a lot more there. I mean,
right,
Bastion was like, there was so much there. There was Pizza Hut and all sorts,
right, right, right.
Starbucks and Costa, and
Yeah,
um,
green
so you
beans.
had all of those sort of the
Right.
shopping experiences and stuff. But
Yeah.
you didn't kind of get that out in the patrol bases or the forward
No,
operating bases.
no,
They
no.
were harsh.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But
But for the
s-
vast majority of people there, it was just a jolly, really.
yeah, yeah. The suicides got me thinking about a detective story, writing a detective story about a guy like myself who's a retired detective who gets brought in, not on a series of unsolved murders, asked to assist in an investigation of some unsolved murders on base in Iraq. But I started working on it when I got home, and I realized that I wasn't really that interested in that. I was more interested in a terrorism story. So that's what the book is. It's a terrorism story.
Mm.
But um, so I when I came back from Iraq, I worked on the book for a while, and then in 2012, because I had been my last, you know, intelligence defense kind of related operational thing, working not operation but working thing, was I worked at MacDill Air Force Base at U.S. Special Operations Command, which is the overriding command for the United States, special tier 1 special operations groups. And and I just got tired of being away from the family. They were tired of it too, and it wasn't a great job. So I came home and I started working in private industry, working investigations for a corporation that is involved in recycling. And I am still doing that, but I am retiring from that in May of this year, and I'll be completely separate from all that, because really this book and the promotion of this book and writing the sequel, which I have started because people have said to me, you need to write another book. We really like this one. Write another. We want more of these characters. So I've started writing the sequel, and it's a full-time job in and of itself. And so I just don't really have time for playing cops and robbers anymore. I want to devote all my energies to my writing, my new career as a writer.
Just about to join us, the ranks of the retired.
Exactly. And happily retired and traveling too,
Yeah.
and
So,
that's what I like.
so your book then, Gary, is that going to be available as an audiobook as well? And have you got somebody in mind to do the narration of it?
Well, I actually have been asked if I was going to do an audiobook. And it is an ebook, besides being in print, in hardcover and softcover. It's an ebook. But there's a lot of work involved with an audiobook. And, some people have said to me that I could be a good narrator for it, but I don't feel like I could be. So that means I'd have to hire an actor to do it, or somebody who does this. And so I guess the short answer is I've thought about it, but at this point in time, it's not under serious consideration. It's I need to develop
I was
the
just
next book.
thinking, looking back to your time doing surveillance and listening
Right.
to audio books, it would be a natural sort of progression into putting it out as an audio book.
And I do listen to a lot of audiobooks. I mean, tons and tons of audiobooks. So, I mean, it is, from a standpoint of as a consumer of audiobooks, it is an interesting thing. And the story itself is very fast paced. And I think it would lend itself to that kind of thing. But right now, I don't, this is my first adventure in this world, and people tell me you need to build a brand, and to build a brand, you have to have, besides the promotion and all the things like this and social media, which is such a pain in the ass. You also have to write another book to start getting following. And so that's what I've begun doing. And I have about 50 pages so far in the can for the second book. And it will bring back most of the main characters. Of course, it'll be a terrorism story. It will primarily be focused in Los Angeles, but there's some international aspects of it for sure. The first scene of the book takes place at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam.
Oh, no, well.
And and it's not selling tulips. I assure you. So
Brilliant.
So
that's kind of brought us right up to date then.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
when's the first book available?
It's available now. It is
Uh-huh.
out there now, and it's on Barnes and Noble, and it's also on not Amazon.com and Barnes and Noble. It's in Hatchards actually. My son got a few books there in Hatchards on Piccadilly next to Fordham and Mason's.
Yeah.
And it's in a couple of the bookstores around here, but primarily the easiest way to get it is online. And like I said, on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Outside the Wire by Gary Edgington, a story of murder, love, and war, which it is. It is a
Hmm.
a murder book, a murder mystery, a love story, and a war story, all wrapped up in one. And I might add, uh, the heroes at the end of the book are some lads from the 22nd SAS.
All right.
Yes, they come in in the last act of the book to save the day and show the Americans how it's really done. Thought you'd like that.
You'll be popular then.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Or they'll go, "Oh, this is rubbish. This isn't that," But anyway, but no, it was it is doing very well, and the thing I'm most excited about is the reviews are excellent, and
Hmm.
the um you've done something right when people come up to you and start quoting lines from the book or say, "Hey, I recognize your voice as one of these characters," or "Are you going to write another book? We want,
Hmm.
I want to read more. I really liked it.
Yeah.
When the book was over, I was disappointed and I wanted to read more." That's like a clue that you really need to sit down and write another one. And that's what I've
Yeah.
done. So, yeah.
Now, would
So
it lend itself to a film?
from your lips to God's ears. I would, I think it would. I've been told that it is potentially very cinematic in that regard. Um, and I actually did a long time ago. I wrote a script that was optioned, so I kind of know a little bit about that. I have not tried to write a script with this. I'm not going to. I'm going to continue
Hmm.
to write prose and do the second book. I'm not going to try and tackle that.
Yeah.
But I think in the right hands, it could be a really fun ride. Because
Hmm.
what's unusual and different about it is it's not a war story told from the standpoint of a soldier or a military civilian. It's told from the standpoint of a sarcastic, seen it all, done it all LAPD detective who's never been in the service, who is a fish out of water, doesn't understand half of what these guys are talking about as far as the acronyms and the this and that, you know, goes to targeting meetings thinking that he's going to hear about blowing bad guys up and finds out it's about waters and chicken and all of that stuff, you know, all this all this military stuff.
Yeah.
And so, and he's a lead follower, get out of the way kind of guy. And that doesn't necessarily work well with the military bureaucracy. And so
Hmm.
it sets it up for a lot of conflict. There's a lot of humor in the book. And of course there is a love story. He ends up falling in love with a army doctor who is a major, who's pretty squared away in her own right. And, they working together, they unravel this terrorist plot hatched in the halls of Tehran that which wouldn't be any big surprise to you, I'm sure. Um, the IRGC figures prominently in this book. Uh, is they unravel this plot that potentially could destroy the coalition and change the entire uh, uh, situation in the Middle East. So that's the story in a nutshell. It starts out as a murder mystery and morphs
Sounds
into a terrorism plot.
fascinating. Sounds
I think
fascinating.
it was fun to write. It was fun to write. It was hard, but it was fun. And when you get the kind of feedback that I've been getting, I know that I did good on this one. I did good.
You pitched it right.
I did. I did.
Brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Well,
so yeah.
let's hope that you can get it into audio version and a
Yeah.
film.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. I would love that. That would be awesome. That would be awesome. And like you said, an audio thing. You're not the first person who's suggested that and mentioned that to me. It's been several
Yeah.
times. So perhaps I should maybe price it
Oh,
out and figure out what the mechanics are involved in it. So
yeah, I enjoy audiobooks.
yeah,
So.
yeah.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I've relished the opportunity to talk with you. I was really very excited when I heard about this opportunity, and really wanted to sit down and talk with you, because I'm a bit of an
Brilliant.
Anglophile. Crazy Americans, you know.
Love it.
So anyway, and I've got to check out this museum. I heard you talking about a museum in Gosport.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, which sounds like it's right up my alley. Military museum sounds fascinating.
So it's not off the ground yet.
Uh-huh.
They've had some rethinking. They're not going to open
Uh-huh.
it as a. They haven't got a building basically.
Okay.
So this year, what they're doing is they're going to be going around the different shows and putting their stuff together like that, and having an online thing.
Yeah, I've been to,
So
yeah, very good. Well,
thanks again.
Pleasure talking with you, sir. Take care. Be safe, and appreciate it.
As always.
All right. Take care.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.